Popularity doesn't always mean a quality product, maybe a bit of complacency or having to balance your books or an uncontrollable urge to fuck over thousands of people by enforcing bullshit copyright laws. But also, by the same margins, obscurity doesn't necessarily translate to bad games.
Modern gaming is in a state of flux. When you can have a AAA game produced by a development team of thousands be overshadowed by a quirky little title made by just a couple of people for next to nothing, the status quo quickly turns itself inside out. Indie games don't have the same restrictions as other massive titles. Fewer fans and shareholders to upset if it's not quite what they're expecting. It takes the pressure off and lets people craft a game using as many creative thoughts as possible. And because indie games have been on the rise for the last couple of years, I've got a list longer than many people's arms of great indie games for this video. I've had to narrow it down to 10, but trust me, there's like 45, 50 games I considered for this list. Just be sure to take it with a pinch of salt. A theme you'll see a lot of in this video is of games that pay tribute to the styles used in earlier gaming generations. There's just something about combining mechanics from the 8-bit era with modern inflections that create both a nostalgic experience and yet one that is still welcoming and enjoyable on its own. And first up is Double Dragon! I mean Castle Crashers.
I do sometimes wonder if the people making games in the 80s and 90s knew how important it was for them to tread that ground, that decades later, people would take such inspiration of what they'd produced that they would then go on to make their own games in that kind of style. It's a hell of a thing to be doing at that time.
Like a lot of games on here, Castle Crashers is a very simple game to appreciate. In fact, if it didn't exude so much charm and humour, you could probably say it's a little cliched in places. I mean, the street-brawling beat-em-ups of yesteryear didn't feature too many groups of multicoloured knights, and no one's ever bragged about getting 50,000 on Castle Crashers, but this deviously simplistic side-scroller with small elements incorporated from an RPG, and fully supported 4-player co-op, sees you journey across generic medieval location, doing all the sorts of things that heroic knights do, including but not limited to interrupting a wedding, riding some deer to freedom, beating up a giant ear of corn, fighting ninja pirates, and taking down an alien spaceship from the inside. Variety truly is the spice of life.
I love super serious games. I believe there's a time and a place for any game to make you feel more than just joy when you play through it, with all these incredibly complex characters, really well thought out stories. It's a really good way to make a game. But I also like stupid games.
As game concepts go, GUACAMELEE is both such a dumb idea for a game, and yet one that you just play out of curiosity. I mean, theoretically there's nothing inherently wrong with an action platformer set in a small Mexican village starring some souped up luchador who's got to save the love interest from an evil skeleton guy, but you'd have to be a little skeptical about a setup like this that's never been explored too much. Not for long though, because you start playing and settle right into this zany adventure. The only fault I can really put towards this game, other than maybe being a tad short, would be trying to play the Steam version with anything other than an external controller. When the game relies so heavily on pulling off specific moves to beat particular enemies, you end up tying your fingers in a knot on a keyboard. Hardly surprising considering the game gives you a lot of different abilities to make it through, but a minor foible in an otherwise hilarious and incredibly vibrant game. And then, at the complete other end of the spectrum, we have a game like BRAID. Not so much a platform beat-em-up like GUACAMELEE, nah, now we're playing with time itself. Might sound like an artsy kind of thing to say, and that's because you're absolutely right. BRAID is one of those games, and there's quite a few on this list, where there's buckets more to it than you'd initially think. Where the game could have easily become defined by its focus on screwing about with time, there's an awful lot more bubbling under the surface. I won't spoil it for you because I'm not that much of a dick, but it's honestly the part I remember the most from BRAID. And let me get this straight, BRAID is smarter than you. I mean, I've played some puzzle games before, but the way BRAID handles some of its puzzles, starting off as a basic platformer with the ability to turn back time if you fail, and eventually with time being dictated by your movement through the level, and being able to warp the flow of time around a small point, it'll blow your mind how creative some of them get.
You can actually go from the first level in the first world to the last level in one of the last worlds without doing anything, without picking up any puzzle pieces. Admittedly, if you want to go to the last world and the epilogue, you have to collect all the puzzle pieces and actually treat it like a puzzle game. But the beauty of Braid isn't in the destination, isn't about completing it, it's in the journey.
I'm not sure what happened with me in Terraria. I bought it, I played it, I enjoyed it, and yet haven't played it since. I'm wondering if it's got anything to do with how much I was loving Minecraft at the time, and maybe I thought Minecraft was more worth my time, but now we're on the other side, I can say that without any sort of modifications to the game, Terraria is a far better experience. On the shallowest of levels, the comparison between Minecraft and Terraria are very obvious. Gather materials, build things, stay the fuck away from any sort of creatures, and try and survive in this hostile world. But while Minecraft runs out of steam halfway down the mineshaft, Terraria's true nature is only found when you dig down and keep on digging. And even without the added depth, I love when game developers take a game idea and break it down to 8-bit graphics and from a 2D perspective. Suddenly this sandbox explorer game takes on a completely different feel.
I think what initially put me off playing Terraria was how often I was dying. I mean, Minecraft on the hardest difficulty can get quite tricky, but Terraria was something else. It's this beautiful double-edged sword you take towards adventuring, where you might find something which is valuable, really useful in your quest, expensive. Or you might find something really strong that wipes you off the face of the game. It's the risk you take.
I may be terrible at puzzle games, but that doesn't mean that I can't enjoy the various ways that games try to get you thinking laterally. Braid played with your understanding of time while slowly telling you a haunting story that I'm still not gonna spoil. And World of Goo uses its ingenious physics-based puzzles and colourful presentation to distract you from an undercurrent of some much heavier shit.
The concept of screwing around with goo balls might sound like something that would only appeal to you as a small child, but by putting it into a puzzle game that constantly challenges your thought process, it's a completely different story.
Reminds me a lot of those bridge building exercises you might have done at some point in your life, and if you haven't yet, you've got something to look forward to. There's many ways of getting from point A to point B, but when you've got an army of lively goo balls at your disposal, the creativity you can impose on these brain teasers, trying to avoid specific hazards or making it within the criteria of the OCD rank, will keep you thinking and entertained for much longer than you'd initially think. 'Tis greater than the sum of its parts.
I love Zelda games. Whoa. To the extent that I'll almost automatically enjoy a game that has a Zelda style to it. And it doesn't just apply to 3D games, as we've seen recently.
Oh, how I love a morbid story of a little boy and his psycho Bible-bashing mother. Where some games might steer clear of touchy issues like child abuse, abortions, and the darker side of religion, The Binding of Isaac rams head first into the darkest depths of what a video game can present a player, all in this deceptively cartoony style. It takes the adventuring style of the first Legend of Zelda game and fills it full of vastly disturbing material that will keep you on your toes in the creepiest way possible. And yet, it doesn't let its morbid nature take over. It's actually quite a hard game if you don't take the right steps, especially because everything from the enemies and room layout to the power-ups made available to you are randomly generated. But you could also look at it as the game always keeping itself fresh. No two playthroughs ever end up the same. And yes, I know they've since added a sequel in Binding of Isaac Rebirth, but I haven't played it yet, which is quite an important thing when you're talking about the pros and cons of games like this. Really is. You'd think that the concept of an indie game is something that's only really taken off in the last few years, and yes, they've definitely emerged in a bigger way recently than ever before. But this next game was being all indie and awesome way back in 2004, with the development process starting way back in 1999. And you know, Cave Story doesn't look 11 years old. Maybe it's because this style of game transcends any and all eras of gaming, especially when you're making it as a direct reference to Metroidvania style games, but Cave Story feels as well put together as any other game on this video. A timeless classic that showed other budding developers the way forward if you're willing to put the time and effort in. You could point to those 5 years as a long time, but this game, from the physics engine and battle mechanics to the interweaving storyline and soundtrack, it all came from the mind of just one guy. By any and all definitions, this is the most indie game on this list, except for the fact that everyone's heard of it now because it's fucking amazing!
If you think that some game genres aren't as common as they were previously, I mean, 2D platformers are hardly ever being made anymore other than indie games, Mario games, Sonic games, Rayman. Okay, they're fairly common, but not as common as they were previously. Cave Story kind of sets this subtle claim to being one of the best 2D platformers of recent memory, and it makes you wonder if Daisuke Amaya knew that in 1999.
We've got this far, time to get philosophical. A lot of other types of media have been considered to some extent to be art. Art itself is defined as having no other purpose as itself, hence why a paperclip or a toaster can't really be art. But can Journey? I'm not sure I've played another game where the title outlines exactly what you're going to be doing for the next couple of hours. Journey is a remarkably beautiful game, not just because of the breathtaking environments you travel through, but because of its premise. Most other games drown you in exposition the moment you boot up the game. Journey drops you into a massive world to explore and gives you one task: reach this mountain. No dialogue, no map, no radar, no other instructions at all to guide you. It's just you, the world, and this solitary goal. Everything else you do is all you, venturing across this remarkably open world, discovering the beauty it has to offer you. There's no enemies to fight or puzzles to solve, which may put some people off, but if the copy-paste nature of modern gaming has got you in a slump, the few hours you spend with Journey will show you just what video games can be.
Journey has online multiplayer, and you might not think it by looking at it, but you can actually go through this game with another person, but you don't know what their name is. So you can bond with whoever this person is as you embark on the same journey together, at which point the god of metaphors is having a bit of a crisis. Mega Man was so popular for the late 80s and most of the 90s, it was the pioneer of this action platformer side-scroller game. And there was a brief revival with Mega Man 9 and 10 in 2008 and 2010 respectively, but it took another 4 years for Shovel Knight to take up the reins properly.
Oh man, Shovel Knight! Didn't really see what all the fuss was about last year when it came out, as, in case you haven't already noticed, there's been a lot of indie games that have been inspired by some of the great classics. Shovel Knight will come and go as a clever nod to the likes of Mega Man and DuckTales, and we'll all get on with our lives, downloading the latest batch of DLC because we're all morons. Does help to play it first before you start making sweeping statements though. Sweet juicy Batman, this game is fun. Mega Man may have got repetitive towards the end, but something this former never lacked was fun factor. Replace Mega Man's arm cannon with a shovel, and the Robot Masters with other knights, and Shovel Knight effectively becomes a more tongue-in-cheek update to what helped to define side-scrollers. It's a remarkable deconstruction of the basics of game design, and then rebuilt in this charming game while filtering out the less desirable parts of older titles, like limited lives and password save systems. There's a lot more simmering under the surface than you'd first think, and playing all the way to the end will teach you a lot about the purer elements that make up a game, and just how great you can make them. Hats off to your Yacht Club games, you brilliant, brilliant bastards. Difficulty in video games can take on so many different forms. If you're that special kind of psychopathic arsehole developer, you can frustrate your gamer and make them ultimately hate you and your game. I'd say, like many other things, you need to build up a bit of mutual respect between the gamer and the game they're playing, so that when they do fuck something up, it feels like their fault rather than the game being stupid.
It is really hard to create a difficulty system in a game that feels rewarding rather than relieving when you beat something. You need to build up an appreciation of how tricky your game is, and the game itself needs to understand how good you are at the game at that specific point and then challenge you accordingly. And one of the best of all time, indie game or not, is Super Meat Boy.
Brace yourself because things are about to get messy, but in the best way possible. Super Meat Boy is up there with I Wanna Be the Guy and Battletoads in terms of difficulty, but it honestly won't feel like it because of how the game treats the challenges it puts forward for you to try and beat. I'm okay with a game kicking my butt from time to time, but Super Meat Boy manages to make it a surprisingly enjoyable experience. And all it took was a bit of effort. The controls and physics engine are so well engineered that it becomes a case of your deaths being the fault of you and you alone. When you die, you get angry. You don't get angry at the game because of this kind of cheap difficulty, no. You get mad at yourself for not being good enough, and the only way to fix that is for you to keep trying and gradually getting better at it. Which might sound like an arduous experience at first, but with a jaw-dropping soundtrack for an indie game and bright visuals, I reckon you won't mind much.
This has been RabbidLuigi, and I've played difficult games before. I've thrown controllers across the room. I've never broken one because controller abuse needs to stop. I've thumped tables, I've thumped walls, I've been very angry at a game, but with Super Meat Boy, Nothing. But no one's using a keyboard.
Hey guys, thanks for watching. Tricky topic to cover because I would have loved to talk about some more obscure indie games, but I would be missing off games that are ultimately much better. I've already mentioned the 50 game shortlist I had, it wasn't easy. But back to top 5 next week, so make sure you keep those suggestions coming. Been getting some fantastic ones recently. And when it comes to voting on which one I do next, Twitter and Facebook are where the magic happens. I'm damn good at card tricks, people.